Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Friday Feelings, where we turn emotions into power, vulnerability into strength, and remind you to feel everything, fear nothing, and transform your life. I'm your host, Jenelle Friday, and today's episode may be a positive and a negative thing. We are talking about managing disappointment using emotional intelligence. And today's guest, Nisha Baxi, is with me today. And Nisha, I first have to tell you, in the middle of chaos for me, I met you at CS 100 as I told myself I could climb. Well, we met at happy hour,
Yeah.
right? Okay, said hello. But I decided to walk from the base where the conference was up that freaking hill in Sundance, Utah, to where we were kind of roomed close together, and made myself sick. And you found me on the side of a trail puking my guts out, and you rubbed my back, you sat with me. I mean, I just was so overwhelmed by you immediately jumped into action to offer care and empathy and kindness. And I will forever be grateful to you for that moment.
You are so sweet. Well, first of all, that was a freaking steep hill, and we were already at a really high elevation. So, and like we went up even higher. So, like I,
Yeah.
anyone could have experienced that. Altitude sickness occurs at over 8,000 feet, and I think we were pretty darn close to it.
Yeah.
And then second of all, I was a Girl Scout until I was 18, and I was too old to be in the program, and they kicked me out. And so I thought that you must have thought I was batty because I carry a big old first aid kit with me everywhere. So I ran to my room. Do you remember I brought the O2 sat monitors?
Yes.
And I was
Yes.
like, okay, your O2 sat, okay, it's mid-range, but it's climbing, it's going up because I wouldn't leave you until I felt like your O2
Yeah.
was in a good place.
Yeah.
Um, but it was fun. Like I think when you meet someone that you connect with and if you feel like you can provide any kind of, help. And I just felt like I knew you as soon as I met you. And I knew that if
Mhm.
I'd 100% know that if the situation were reversed, you would have been like, oh my gosh, this person is like really sick and needs some help.
Yeah.
Like, how can I help them? And so
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just what life is about,
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
it's a great story to say this is kind
yeah.
of how we broke the ice in our friendship, right?
It's true. It's true. I'm like, nice to meet you. And then you start vomiting. Actually, we've had a lot of vomit in our relationship because now that I'm pregnant and I've been having morning sickness, I've been telling you like my, vomit diary. So uh,
Well, on the last call that you and I had, you had to run early because you needed to go throw up. So,
that
so
is
I guess
exactly right. I was like, I'm so sorry,
yeah,
Janelle.
we'll
Bye
bond
bye.
over puking. So thank you so much for being here and being willing to, share a little bit about your life and how you've managed through disappointment. So I'd love for you to kind of tell us a little bit about you and why this topic specifically of disappointment is something that you are open to discussing.
Yeah, I think a little bit about me. I was born in Dallas, Texas. I was raised in the Bay Area. I come from a mixed heritage. So my mom is Filipino, a little bit Chinese, and my dad is Indian. Um, in my home, my parents have always just been so nurturing and loving and just always so supportive of us and, our goals and things that we wanted to do. I remember my dad always said, Nisha, no matter what college that you go to, wherever you get in, we will find a way to pay for it. I want you to just have whatever life that is meant for you. Um, and I was always sort of like a Jill of all trades. Like I like doing lots of different things. And so, in high school, I was in student government. I was the captain of our cheerleading squad, but I also volunteered 1,000 hours for the American Red Cross, and I was a Girl Scout until I graduated. And that's a lot to do. And, my grades actually weren't the best. I wasn't a straight A student. So I wasn't one of those kids where it's like, oh, she does all those things and she also had straight A's. I think I was a B student. I probably had a B average. I got A's and B's and maybe a C here or there. Um, and you know, I I felt that I wanted a well-rounded life experience. And when you do that and you put yourself out there quite a lot, in life, um, you don't always get what you want back. In fact, now that I mentioned the cheerleading thing, I remember, I really wanted to be a cheerleader, and I think it was because I grew up in Texas, right? And so that was like a big part of the culture. And I was in baton twirling, and I was like, okay, when I'm in high school, I'm going to join the squad. And in eighth grade, to try out for the high school squad, you have to go across the street to the high school, and then you have to try out. And I didn't have the guts. So I never tried out, and I wish that I did. And I remember feeling
Mm.
deeply like I should have put myself out there, and I didn't. And then I said, okay, the next year I'm going to do it. And so when I was in ninth grade, I tried out for the squad to be in the squad for 10th grade. And guess what? I got cut. And I remember getting cut, and I was so sad because I had wanted it so bad. And I had practice, and I had done all the things, and I felt like I was in a good place.
Mm.
I was so heartbroken, and I was very disappointed. So
Mm.
disappointment starts early. You learn about those things as a youth,
Yeah.
and you don't know exactly what word it is, but you're very upset. And so I think, it was a big letdown. But from the disappointment, there comes either you decide to change paths, or paths just naturally change, or you double down and you say, this is something that I really want.
Mm.
And I tell you, Janelle, I said, I come hell or high water, I'm joining the squad. And the next year, I tried out, and I tried out for varsity, and I made the team. And then senior year, I became captain. And
Wow.
so,
I
and
love
sometimes
that.
stories are like that. And other times you're just disappointed, and shit hits the fan,
Yeah.
and the shit is still on the fan. It doesn't get cleaned up. It's just there, and you have to live with the shit in the fan.
Yeah.
So, that was a nice story where, eventually after, a
Yeah.
5-year journey of cheerleading, I
Yeah.
finally made my dream.
Hmm.
But anyway, I didn't know I was going to talk about.
Well, let's no, I want to
Yeah.
kind of stay in this little bubble that we're talking about, right? So, first of all, let's define when we say disappointment, right? We're talking about a natural response to
Yep.
unmet expectations or a perceived failure,
Yep.
right? That's kind of what we're talking about. And it matters because when disappointment is left unmanaged, unaddressed,
Yep.
it fuels things like shame, resentment, and self-doubt.
100%.
But when you put the EQ hat on and can look at disappointment through an EQ lens, it can actually become a teacher. So I would say awareness is the first step of that. And so now I'm going to ask you to go back to your ninth grade self.
Mhm.
Right. And I want us to try to define the real root of that disappointment. So there's a 3-layer kind of approach that I use, which is what happened, what did I expect, and what emotions were underneath all of this at the end when I was left with disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, I did make the squad, and the deep reason I wanted to do that is because, every young person wants to belong. They want to feel like they're part of something bigger, like a part of a group. And I, was rejected from that group, and that's a lot to take as a preteen. And so, um, what was the third part that you said around?
Um, what's the primary emotion that you were left with when you didn't make the squad?
I
Was
mean,
it I'm not good enough? Was it I didn't practice hard enough? Was it
oh yeah, it always starts with that, right?
yeah.
It's self-doubt. You blame yourself, right? You're like, oh, like I'm just not good enough. Like I am not athletic enough, or, I just felt like there's something that I was missing. So I was looking at myself and saying, looking at myself as a deficit. And so what I realized over time is that, yeah, you can work on those things. You can always be like, this is an athletic thing. But what I also realized that was a little bit deeper, that the coach saw in me when I retried out again and I made it, was it is a cheerleading squad, but we're spirit leaders at the company, or at the school, the company. I've been working for 20 years. Oh, the
We
company.
can translate it to the
Yeah, at
company.
the company, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is what it's like in life. And
Yeah.
it was so important for me to make sure that, to bring a deeper, like, amount of, like my who I am as a person, and be more of a a spirit leader by getting people to be more motivational. I think helping others. It wasn't just about cheering for football and basketball. I mean, we cheered for every single sport. We showed up for our team, for all of the teams. I remember we would go to swim meets and we would hold numbers at the bottom of the pool. So like we would
I
do,
was a swimmer.
yeah,
I love that.
I,
Yes.
I showed
For
up with
that
towels.
stupid 1500 swim that I hated having to do.
Yeah, I was the person that was like, you're almost
Yeah.
done. Here's the lap number. Like we
Yeah.
pulled up lap signs and we give you towels and we'd go to tennis
Mm,
matches. And I think it's about bringing people together and letting them know that like we all care about you and we
yeah.
want everybody in this school to be represented equally. And I think when people saw that I brought something different to the table, that I knew how to bring people together in a different way. Plus, maybe I wasn't like the best dancer. I was a good dancer, but I wasn't the best. They were like, she can bring something else that nobody else brings to the team. And so I think
Mm,
that from that disappointment and saying this coming from a place of deficit, I then had an opportunity to take a step back and said, what is this really about? What am I good at? Leaning into what I'm good at and say, okay, well, from that. uh,
would you say that your home environment and your parents' love and support was a massive or a big part of your ability to sit with the disappointment and determine I'm gonna go back. This is what I want to do. I can be good at this. I'm gonna try this again.
I think it definitely had something to do with it. I mean, my dad and my mom always said, you can do anything that you want, that you set your mind to. And they supported all of it. I mean, granted, when I joined the cheerleading squad, my mom added an inch to my skirt. She goes, we we got we got fitted, and she was like, "Yeah, you're gonna have to add an inch to that." And I was like, "Mom, everyone's is shorter." And she said,
That sounds
"Not
like
my
my
daughter,
parents do.
not my daughter. You're not walking out there with this like."
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of a longer skirt, which is a cute story.
I
Um,
love that. So let's fast forward,
yeah,
right? Because you have this beautiful example as a teenager, and I think your resilience is probably inherent from the environment you were raised in. You had a steady parental persona that really I think helped develop that. But now let's fast forward to your professional life. So tell us a little bit about the professional life, and then maybe share what was a major disappointment that you've had to face in your professional life and how you worked through that?
sure. Yeah. I mean, when you asked me to speak about disappointments, I was like, well, I got a long list, like personal, professional, like let's see what story comes first to mind as I'm
Mm,
talking about it. But yeah, my career, I mean, I started out doing consulting. I wanted to do what was like the right job, like you're supposed to get when you graduate from college. I actually wanted to work at Google. So I went to college in Chicago and I worked at IBM for 2 years while I was in college. So I was an intern there and I got a job offer at IBM to do sales, but I didn't want to do sales because sales wasn't cool. Like that wasn't the cool job. The cool job was, working at Google or traveling around as a fancy consultant and traveling for 4 days out of the week and then, coming home and just like, I thought that was cool. And so I turned down the IBM job. And so this goes into the disappointment story a little bit. And so I turned down the IBM job and I was like, okay, I'm going to go for this Google job. So I had applied while I was a senior in college. And you flew me to the campus and to go through the whole interview process. And I met a lot of people that were candidates. And it was like a full day thing. I think it was maybe 2 days. It was a big deal. They like put us up in a hotel and they gave us all the swag. And I mean,
what was the job title that you were interviewing for?
I'm so glad that you asked. So it was for people management sorry, not people management, the people team. So HR,
Okay.
which, that is not where my career went. So I spent, just taking a step back, I spent, 10, 15 years in marketing and now I sit in customer success. So I've always kind of been on the go-to-market side. I've worked at big companies, IBM, Microsoft, Salesforce, Facebook. I've also worked at, tiny startups that failed and that also turned into something really great. And now I work at Gong. I've been at Gong for 4 years.
Mm,
That's my quick background of who I am.
yeah.
But going back to this disappointment, is, I go through this whole thing and I said, I'm going to work at Google because I want to, I grew up in the Bay Area. My parents live in San Jose. They live, I went to Cupertino schools. I just assumed I would work at Apple or Google or something like that. And, Google was hot at that time. In 2007, it
Mhm.
was like the company, like
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you could even get an interview, that was awesome. And I was so proud that I was able to get an interview. Anyway, you know how the story's going to end. I didn't get the job. And I was devastated. I was like, "Oh my
Mhm.
God, I didn't get this job." And then actually I didn't even get like the cool consulting job either because I got a consulting job, but it wasn't, a Accenture or Bain where I got to fly out every week and then come back. Like it was a boutique consulting firm in Santa Clara, and I worked for Cisco essentially. And I worked in their sales operations team. And so I learned a lot about rev ops and sales ops at that time, from the lens of Cisco. But anyway, I was disappointed because
Mhm.
I wanted to fit in. This is like, cheerleader Nisha was like, oh, this is like the cool thing to do. And like, I really want to be at Google. But you know what? Janelle, I would have been so bad at HR. Dude, I would have been horrible at HR.
Why do you say that?
I just don't think HR is it, HR has to toe a lot of lines.
Yeah,
They represent the company. They also try their best to represent the employee. I've seen at different companies, at most companies, not at Gong, but at most companies, they really just represent the company. They
the
don't really
company.
care about
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
And, I'm the type of person that likes to take really big and hard stances on stuff. And if I saw something that wasn't going well and I saw an injustice happening and the employer was doing it, I'd want to be like, dude, this is wrong. Like I'd want to quit my job. Like I wouldn't be
yeah,
cut. I don't know how to
yeah,
be diplomatic and toe that line. I'm not that person. I'm just too vocal.
yeah. So let's go back to the moment you find out you didn't get the job,
Yeah.
right? Like you said, you're devastated. So I want to just sit in that emotion for a second because devastated is a really good word. I talk a lot about the first step to emotional intelligence is being able to identify what you're feeling, to name the emotion you're feeling, because that helps us then understand the bigger picture. Um, so let's I'm
Yeah.
not to fixate, but we're talking in a moment of devastation,
Yeah.
right? Um, creating a growth mindset through failures, through setbacks, through disappointment. Would you say that your previous life experiences with disappointment helped you accept and move forward faster, better than you anticipated? Or did you have to work through some depression, some anxiety, some insecurities? Like, walk us through those emotions.
Oh, always. I mean, anytime you deal with any setback, any disappointment, big or small, what I always say is, and now, especially now that I'm 39, I'm turning 40 this year, I look back and I say, you know what? You've been through hard stuff. Like this isn't a hard, I mean, it's just not getting the job. Like that's not a hard thing. Cheerleading, that's not a hard, like I've
Right.
now having lived like personal things, and I'm happy to share some of those on this podcast, um, to share what those are. But it's like, dude, this doesn't really matter. Like it sucks. You're going to get through it. This is a setback, but they always say, when God closes a door, he opens a window, or, sometimes it's two steps back and one step forward. Um, I,
But
f-
did you kind of like because I actually kind of did the same thing. I flew back to Washington at one point after moving to Colorado
yeah,
to be an executive assistant for a massive nonprofit
yep,
in Washington that I had like been a huge fan of. So I was like, this is my job. I'm gonna own it. I can't wait for the yes. And I even got on the plane to go home, and the HR person left a voicemail for me to call her right away. And I was like, yeah, this is fine. And it wasn't mine. Right. And I'm a very visual person. So I
yeah,
visualized this is where I'm going to live and this is how I'm going to go to work and this is going to be my new life because I saw the offices. Like I had this whole picture of what that looked like. And I think, especially for people who are visual like me, when it's a no, I now have to disassociate myself from what I pictured and what I created in my mind, and letting go of that was really hard for me because I was in it. It was mine, right? And so, I think really I want to shift the conversation now to this muscle that you've created. You've been building a muscle of not just resilience, but I think it's safe to say that when you go through these emotions of devastation, of disappointment, of failure, you feel shameful, maybe depending on what the disappointment is. Um, Getting to the place to feel it, right?
Yep.
Negative emotions have a physical impact on your body. It's energy that your body holds that doesn't feel great, right? And sometimes, which I think this is crazy to say, but it's true, we like the way that feels,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Sometimes feeling depressed and angry and sad, why does that feel good? When I look at it, I look backwards at it, I'm like, what is my problem? That wasn't a great way to spend my time, but we do it, right? So do you find yourself that you had to kind of sit through those emotions and live in those before you could take a step forward?
Yeah, I mean, I, for sure. I mean, that's a little bit of a leading question, but I think it's leading for a reason, right? Is I think there's a difference between, building up a muscle and having a chip on your shoulder. When you've got a chip on your
Yeah.
shoulder, you're bearing stuff deep down, down deep, and there's resentment, and there's no introspection. You're not sitting with it, working through it, addressing it, and you're kind of shirking it off, and it kind of comes off. It'll come across in your desk again probably in a not so great way throughout your life. Building a muscle means that you've taken the time to address it and work through it and say, hey, like this didn't work out. This is probably why that it didn't. Things haven't worked in the past. Janelle, I told you this earlier, but someone once told me that, everything works out in the end. And if it's not working out, it's not the end. And so anchoring on those things and just looking back at your life and thinking about all the other times that you've been disappointed, but somehow it ended up working out. Oh, like this horrible thing happened, but now I'm in a better place. Like, the personal thing that I think was probably the biggest, most heartbreaking disappointment that I had in my life was, I was in a relationship for 5 years and I thought, me and this guy were going to get married and actually I broke up with him. And then 6 months later, I realized, oh my God, I made a mistake. By the time I went back, he was gone. And he ended
Mm,
up, getting married, having kids with this other person. I mean, this is devastating, right? To someone, a young person.
yeah.
I was in my early 30s and I was like, holy crap, like my whole life is now turned upside down. But now, as you heard in the beginning of this show, I mean, I met the love of my life. I'm pregnant, like I'm having my first child. Like I live, if everything that I ever wanted in somebody in a home and like just a, like I've met my dream guy. And I didn't realize that at that time, and I had to work through it. I mean, I spent a year. I mean, I was deeply sad. I was devastated. I mean, I lost so much weight because I couldn't even eat anything. I mean, I remember my girlfriend called me and she said, Nisha, please just eat a scoop of peanut butter. You need food in your body. And I just said, I can't eat
Mm,
anything.
mm.
I mean, I looked, I, I, I don't know. I mean, I probably looked skinny and probably the best I've ever looked in my whole life. And no one ever saw me because I was depressed and I just stayed in my house and cried and sang karaoke alone.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I empathize with that. I was married
Yeah.
in my early 30s, and 6 months after we'd been together for 2.5 years, 6 months after we got married, um, my grandfather went into the hospital on a Saturday. He was a diabetic and there were complications. So I was in Washington and my mom was they were in Portland. And so my mom and I were supposed to go Monday morning to drive down to Portland to be with him. And over the weekend, I'd seen a doctor because I'd been sick for forever. And they called me Sunday night and they're like, your blood sugar levels are through the roof. We think you're diabetic. You need to come in.
Oh my
So I
gosh.
called my mom and I was like, Mom, I got to go in and see the doctor tomorrow. So I'm not going to be there, but I'll drive down when I'm done. So I
Yeah.
go into the doctor's appointment. They diagnosed me as a diabetic, late stage diabetic. And I cried because my great grandmother was a diabetic. I watched my grandpa go through it. Like I knew what it meant.
Yeah.
And I walked out of that appointment to a phone call from my grandmother saying, you don't need to come because he's passed.
Oh my God.
Uh, and 3 days later, this individual cleaned out all of our bank accounts and left my husband.
Oh my God.
And I remember being in bed for weeks. And my mom finally came over. I remember it vividly. She finally came over one day and she's like, "This, we're done. You are not going to let this individual ruin the rest of your life because you chose the wrong person." Right?
Mhm.
I don't even know that I would say that now because the lessons that I learned through that relationship and of myself in those moments um, are really profound. And so I want to shift now into the positive side of this conversation, which is, Nisha, if there's someone listening to this call that you're like, you don't even know half of my life, it's all disappointment. I've never had anybody. Like, there are a lot of people out there that kind of are stuck in this mentality of, everywhere I turn, it's disappointment,
Mhm.
right? How do I become positive about life? How do I put myself out there when I get rejected over and over? There are a lot of job seekers right now that have gone through hundreds of interviews and continually get no. So, from that perspective, I want to shift our focus into, how do you now give positive and encouraging advice to someone who just feels bombarded by disappointment and failure and feeling alone and isolated?
Disappointment is the opposite of something, which is getting what you want and feeling fulfilled and being elated. The only reason that you even that word exists is because at some point in your life you were experienced, you yourself have experienced joy, happiness, not disappointment. Exactly the opposite of disappointment. And people are comfortable there, they're happier there, they want to go back to that place.
Mm.
And so what I say is that anchor on the fact that you have had those moments in your life and it will come back. Also, disappointment will come back and you'll have to learn how to deal with that. But life is, my mom always said, life is a wheel. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, but it's always moving. And so I think for me, when I'm in a place where and I know this conversation isn't about being afraid or scared, but when I am in a place where I'm like, I remember especially when I was younger and I would do big things, like I wanted to be bold. And I remember, I was in high school and I took did 2 weeks off of uh, school and I did Outward Bound and I climbed up the Continental Divide and my toilet was a shovel and I did a big backpacking trip. It was huge. And I remember being so uncomfortable and so scared. I mean, I was rock climbing in the Rockies. Like that's a lot for someone so young. And I just remember being like, okay, this is a very extreme, crazy thing. Like I could literally fall and die in this moment. Like I knew that. But I also knew the opposite of that was comfort and was being, and I thought, what is the most comfortable place in your whole life? And it was I remember in my parents' house, in my bedroom, like on my exact bed, that exact place. And I remember closing my eyes and thinking, at some point, sometime really soon, you're going to be back in that bed in that comfortable position. So just anchor on that and remember that. Go through this because you're going to get there. I promise. And so I would say that for somebody that's dealt with disappointment and is dealing with it now, is you've also dealt with the other side, and just know that it's there. And and look, like, Jenelle, like it took you years to get over what happened to you. I mean, that's a lot in such a short period of time. Same with me. Like I moved back in with my parents. I moved out of that day that I found out that he was seeing someone else. And I was so shocked. And I literally packed up my entire apartment that day in San Francisco. I told my landlord I had to move out and I moved back in with my parents. I lived with my parents for a year and a half. Like I just was so devastated. And, but from that, like I realized that I was living slowly, you realize, holy crap, like I was living in a box. Like this, my life would have looked in a certain way, but I wanted more for myself. I forgot how ambitious I was because I was so like routine and comfortable with this person. And I was like, wait, I like fashion. I like going out into like, meeting people. I like, I was doing so much work with the Red Cross before. I wasn't doing anything anymore. Like and now my husband and we both sit on the American Red Cross board together for Silicon Valley, and he's our president, and I run our women's group. And it's awesome, like that I'm now doing these things, but I would never, you know what? I'm so glad that this guy broke my heart, and I broke his heart too, right? It wasn't, you heard the story. It wasn't like, I was like this innocent little flower in this whole thing. I was like, no, I think I knew that about myself, and I broke up with him first, but then I got scared and I got nervous and I wanted to go back to the comfort. So anyway,
Mm.
the moral of all of this is that you're going to go through disappointment, but then you're also going to go through times of elation, and you're going to go back to disappointment, and it's just always a cycle. And the more that you can accept that, I think the more that you'll be ready to roll with it when it comes.
I'm going to dig into, because you have a really amazing closing, which I want to get to, but I want to kind of go through a couple things. One, that we're talking about emotional intelligence, emotional maturity, emotional regulation, and in the face of disappointment, um, disappointment often sparks defensiveness or shutdown, right? We isolate, we remove, we allow mental language, conversations in our head, imposter syndrome, try to convince us
Yep.
that we're all these things that are not true, right? So I just want to talk through a couple physical strategies that I use, that I teach for others. One is breathing. I think managing and controlling your breathing is an underestimated tool that I wish people would embrace more, because our brains and our thoughts spark the chemicals that trigger our nervous system. The nervous system produces chemicals that are our emotions and our feelings, and all of those affect the way that our breathing impacts our bodies and the mind body connection. That's another thing, and I talk about that a lot. But breathing is going to impact so many different elements of your body, including your brain and your thoughts. So if you're someone who is sitting in disappointment or you're overwhelmed by disappointment, the first piece of advice I'm always going to give you is, how's your breathing?
Mm-hmm.
Can you take 30 seconds to a minute to do a box breathe? 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out. Do the butterfly hug. We've talked about the butterfly hug, right? So managing your breathing. I also think, getting things out of your head is really helpful, because then you can look at it and go, oh, that's what I'm feeling, right? So I talk about journaling, but journaling is really writing. To write down your experience and what you're feeling and the thoughts that you're having allow you to take a step back and look at it and go, oh, that's how I'm feeling. That's what I'm thinking. We got to get it out of our head. And then the third one, and I've already said this, is to name your emotions. And in order for you to be emotionally intelligent and mature in relationships, you have to first be able to be emotionally mature for yourself and understand, this is what I'm feeling and this is why I'm feeling it. It's not enough to just say, I'm sad, I didn't get the job. Okay. We got to get deeper than that. And a tool that I use a lot for myself is the emotions wheel, the feelings wheel. I even use it still, because it's not easy to always get to the root cause of the emotions that we're feeling. And that's a huge part of growing and maturing for yourself and then in other relationships. And so those are things like, to just say that disappointment is a signal of how you're feeling. It's not your identity. You
Mm-hmm.
not getting a job, you breaking up with someone that you love, you failing at something and being disappointed with yourself or whatever. It's a bubble. It's a phase of life that is not forever. And so a couple things, right? Failure isn't final, it's formative. Um, I want you to think about setting micro goals, because again, if you're feeling like you're a disappointment and you set micro goals and you hit them, you're training your brain to remember that you are capable, that you can do things, that you are successful. And I want to give this a quote. It's by Summer Redstone, and Sumner says, "Success is not built on success. Success is built on failure,
Yep.
frustration, and even catastrophe." And so when I asked you, Nisha, before we started this recording, I said, well, what's a practical takeaway or advice if there's a listener on the call going, I'm living in disappointment, I don't even know where to start, what practical advice could you give? And most guests that I bring onto this podcast, Nisha, have a tangible takeaway. Here's what you would try, or here's what I did, or here's a book to read, or right? And your answer, I absolutely love. So, Nisha, if there's a listener looking for advice because they're
Yep.
in the middle of disappointment, what advice would you give them?
sometimes you shouldn't do anything. I think we live in a world where we're always trying to fix things. We're always trying to do something. Output, 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 execute, execute, execute. The universe has responded to you and has said, this is not your path. You are disappointed because the universe said, this is not what's supposed to happen. There are things that are bigger than us, forces, energy that is bigger than us. And sometimes you just have to sit quietly, stop doing, and the universe is giving you your answer. You are getting the inputs back from all the outputs that you've done. It has nothing to do with you or what you've done. It has everything to do with what the universe has decided that your story is going to be. Remember, everything always works out in the end. And if it's not working out, it's not the end.
I'm going to write that down because I absolutely love that quote. Um, and I also want to say it's such a profound thing because I am very much output, output, output. I don't
Mhm.
have a lot of downtime in my day, and I'm very, if I don't have something to do and I'm bored, I'm not good when I'm bored, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I also think too that disappointment can challenge our self-worth. And I want to be very clear. No one determines your self-worth but you.
Mhm.
If you're disappointed of things that are out of your control, has nothing to do with your self-worth. If you're disappointed with yourself, like I'm not working out like I should. I struggle with emotional eating. I'm doing way better, but it's a challenge for me. And I have a day where I'm so disappointed in myself for the choices that I made. And the old Janelle would have been depressed for a week and been like, well, then I'm just gonna sit in this and eat all the wrong stuff for a week, right? And really feel that. And today I take one day at a time. I celebrate my wins and I chalk up disappointments to learning lessons and am trying to put parameters and things in place so I don't do it again. So I love that advice, Nisha, and I'm so grateful for voices like you, who can talk openly and transparently about what you've gone through and what you're feeling. And so before we wrap today, if someone wants to connect with you and know more about how to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Sure, LinkedIn, or you can, yeah, send me a message, add me as a friend. You can also email me. You can email my personal email, baxi.nisha@gmail.com. Totally fine. Yeah, I think, disappointment is like a very real thing. It makes you human. Uh,
Yeah,
you feel in a horrible way, you feel alive. And so just remember you'll always come out on the other side because life is a wheel.
that's right. And as long as you're breathing, you're resilient.
Totally.
I need to remind people that as long as you're
Totally.
still breathing
I mean,
air.
I will say something that you said is that I know we're closing up here, but is that, we're Americans. We live in the United States. The culture is to keep moving. It is the culture to say, I'm so busy. I have so many things. Oh my God, I have a million things on my plate, and actually have a million things on your plate. And nobody would ever look at the Dalai Lama or a monk and say, this guy is so ineffective. He's so inefficient. All he does is sit all day and just quietly meditate. I mean, these are the wisest of wise humans on
Mhm.
this planet
Mm,
because they are listening to the universe and they are understanding deeper things that are way deeper than the most profound things we could even think of on a day to day. And so I think if you can just take a little bit, and this is to your yes, breathe and quietly and just sit in a chair at the end of the day, let the day pass you by, watch your day, meditate in that, let things come in and out of your brain. It's completely fine. And just let the universe talk to you. Stop trying
mm,
to control everything. You're
yeah.
just not in control. It's just not, you're just
Yeah.
not. Sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not. Uh,
Yeah.
so
I'm a movie. I love movies. And I remember Jurassic Park, when Ellie is in the cafeteria with John and he's like, when we have control, and she goes, you never had control. That's the illusion. Right? I love that line. Nisha, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for
yeah.
sharing and be open. And I can't wait to have you again. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Janelle. Thanks for thinking of me.
Yeah, of course. And as we wrap today's episode, as always, I'm going to encourage you to be inspired to feel deeply, even if those feelings are feelings of disappointment, to live fearlessly, to not allow your disappointment, your insecurity, your frustration, or your anger to keep you from moving forward. And to be authentic with yourself and with others. That if you are in a time of disappointment and sadness, to sit in it for a moment, to be real and authentic with yourself, but don't allow that to keep you moving forward. I want you to keep leaning into your feelings because that's where transformation starts. It's from within. We will see you guys next Friday.